People think I'm the victim. They don't know about the one thing I did that started it all. If this ever gets out, I'll lose everything. They made me the joke everyone forwarded. The guy in the memes. The quiet punchline with 1,000 laughing emojis. So I turned their little lives into slow-motion disasters. Fired, blacklisted, left with nothing but the echoes of their own arrogance. And that, my friends, was only the beginning, the moment everything tilted. There's this split second, sometimes it's loud, like a betrayal that slams a door, sometimes it's soft, a quiet rot that eats away at you. For me it wasn't a single cinematic betrayal. It was months of small, corrosive things, the snickers under breath, the harmless nicknames, the way my work was repackaged and handed to other people like a gift. By the time I realized how deep it had gone, the damage had already been done. I worked at a marketing firm that looked like it belonged in a glossy magazine, bright lights, sleek desks, people who smelled like confidence and espresso. On the outside it gleamed, on the inside it was a pressure cooker. Image mattered more than impact. Politics were the currency. If you spoke the loudest or smiled the prettiest, you won. I wasn't loud. I didn't wear the right blazer or laugh at the right jokes. But I was good, stupidly good, honestly. I closed big accounts, saved campaigns that were dying, carried projects that others only pretended to care about. Numbers loved me. Numbers didn't lie. People did. At first I laughed it off, because what else could I do? I told myself patience would win out. Keep doing the work, keep letting the metrics speak. Surely somebody would notice. But patience has a sell-by date, and theirs expired long before mine. The jabs got meaner, the cute nicknames sharper. And then, of all days, came the Monday that rewired everything. I'd poured weeks into a pitch. Nights with half-empty coffee cups, color-coded slides, rehearsing lines until they landed like a practice punch. It was airtight. I could see the deal in my head, $1 million handshake, the kind of win that changes how people see you. Everyone had my outline beforehand. No one objected. Then I stood up in front of the room and started to speak, and the air shifted. Jacob, the office golden boy, the guy with a laugh that made people forgive him anything, cut me off mid-sentence with this smug grin. "We've decided to go in a different direction," he said, clicking to the next slide. It was my work, rearranged, souped up with glitter, presented like someone else's brainchild. Little bits of my research stuck in new clothes. The room laughed. Not a polite chuckle, the vicious, clubbing kind that lands in your chest like a physical blow. My stomach turned to lead. Then Melissa, our manager, tilted her head at me with this practiced, bored sympathy and said, "Next time, coordinate better. We can't afford to waste everyone's time." Coordinating? They'd stolen my hours, my blood, and then made me sign for it like I was the one who messed up. I froze. I could feel my throat closing, air thick and slow. That's when something inside me broke clean. Not with a shout or a dramatic exit, I refused to hand them that scene. I swallowed the humiliation instead, walked back to my desk like a man who'd been given a quiet sentence, shut my door, and sat very still. But stillness isn't always submission. For the first time, I stopped being invisible. I started to watch. Every hallway whisper, every eye roll, every little power play, I logged it all. Who leaned on whom, who had a vulnerability, who pretended not to be scared about money. Jacob's swagger was a loud, predictable beat, Melissa's control was brittle, held together with personal messes she'd paid to keep private. The rest of them? Entitled, careless, certain their luck would never run out. I didn't need drama. I needed strategy. Revenge, if you can call it that, wouldn't be explosive. It would be surgical. A slow burn. I began building a case, not out of spite, but because theft deserves payment. I started collecting emails, financial notes, compliance slips, little contradictions that, when pulled together, made a rope. Late nights and early mornings became my archive sessions, cross-referencing reports, saving awkwardly worded messages, making sure every piece was incontrovertible. No shaky claims. No gossip. Only ironclad proof. At the same time I doubled down on my public face, spotless deliverables, professional emails, a presence that looked untouchable. The quieter I seemed, the less anyone suspected. Jacob was an easy first target. He boasted in the break room, loud enough for the fluorescent lights to flicker, deals he hadn't closed, relationships he'd exaggerated, shortcuts he'd taken. One afternoon, his arrogance slipped the leash. He bragged on the phone about cutting corners to seal a client, fudged numbers, ignored compliance, like it was a badge of honor. I heard him. I took notes. I found threads that backed up the phone call, then made copies and organized them like evidence for a case. He started noticing me asking small, annoyingly precise questions. "Careful," he warned once in the hallway, leaning in with that chest-out posture. "You're poking at things bigger than you." I smiled where it didn't show. "You think I was poking?" "No, I was mapping." Meanwhile, Melissa began to show cracks I'd suspected. Once razor-sharp, she hummed off-key. Deadline slid. Whispers blew up about a divorce, overdue bills, calls from people who weren't patient. I worked a different angle, befriending a junior assistant who wanted to be noticed, listening more than talking, and letting her talk about things she shouldn't have. Panic emails to HR to please for deadline extensions. A web of little concessions that, if tugged at the right points, would unravel her authority. I fed HR anonymous, carefully constructed tips about compliance issues that traced back to her department, not lies, but consequences of corners she'd allowed to be cut. Seeds of mistrust sprouted. Slowly, the office climate shifted. The clique, once a thundering herd, began to thin. Side conversations popped like bad seams. People looked over their shoulders. The laughter became less casual and more cautious. And me? I kept my calm because timing was everything. I wasn't just trying to take back what was mine. I wanted to bring down a whole flimsy empire built on theft, cruelty, and entitlement. I wanted them to remember who'd taken the wrecking ball to their little kingdom. Weeks slid by, the plan tightening. The house of cards was higher than it should have been. But every tower has a seam. You just need to find it, press, and wait. I'd found the seam. I was holding my finger over it, counting the beats before the collapse. And then, right when the pieces were falling exactly where I wanted them to, something happened that I didn't expect. Why then the air in the office felt different, heavy, electric, like the room was holding its breath before a storm. You could literally taste the tension sometimes, metallic and sharp, as if the fluorescent lights themselves were charged. Those people who used to swagger down the halls with champagne confidence started hesitating at doorways, checking their phones with that furtive look of someone who's suddenly unsure if there's a net beneath their feet. They had no idea what was building under my calm. On the surface, I didn't change a thing. Same commute, same coffee cup, same habit of slipping in early and leaving late. Head down, work done, the perfect mask. Nobody suspected the slow-weather hurricane I was running on the inside. But beneath that quiet exterior, I was watching everything break itself apart in the most deliciously obvious ways. Jacob's bluster began to fray in small, delicious increments. First it was a slip in a client call that turned into a leak, a single conversation that exposed how one of his shortcuts had backfired in an expensive way. Compliance started poking around, and suddenly his laugh sounded thinner. I watched him shrink from swagger into twitchy nervousness. Every cocky grin he used to flash in the break room turned into a glance over his shoulder. One day I intercepted an email thread between him and his mentor, the shadowy senior exec who pulls strings from behind the scenes. The mentor's tone was pure panic, furious, demanding fixes, telling Jacob to clean it up before it burned them all. You could feel Jacob's desperation like a second-hand embarrassment. It was almost painful to watch him fumble. Melissa, meanwhile, was unraveling faster than I thought she would. The sharpness that used to cut through meetings dulled. She started missing the little cues that made her seem in control. Dark circles dug themselves under her eyes. Her voice sometimes wavered, the kind of crack that betrays sleepless nights and a brain running on too much worry and not enough sleep. One late evening, I happened to pass her open office, and there it was, an envelope shoved under a stack of folders, its flap barely tucked in. When I glanced down, I could see the corner of collection notices and past due statements peeking out. A glimpse into the chaos she'd been paying to hide. It felt obscene and candid all at once, like seeing the foundation of a building crumble while everyone else pretended the paint was the whole structure. I didn't rub it in. Revenge isn't a party, not the way I did it. It's a slow, cold process that needs precision. So I used what I knew to start building something else, alliances with the people who'd been shoved to the margins. The ones who weren't loud enough to get credit and not quiet enough to be left alone. Folks who had been worn down by the toxicity but didn't know how to push back. We traded stories in whispers, pooling incidents, copying emails, saving screenshots, the small betrayals and the big ones. We weren't rabble-rousers, we were collecting receipts. A quiet network formed, low and steady, and for the first time in months I felt the axis of the office tilt toward something real. Timing was everything. I had my evidence sorted, my witnesses lined up in principle, and a plan that hinged on hitting them where it hurt, credibility, reputation, the architecture of power they'd built by stepping on everyone else. And then the perfect opening arrived earlier than I expected. It was one of those gray, rainy Wednesdays where everyone wants to escape 5 minutes early and pretend productivity is a myth. Rain ticked on the windows like a metronome. The office hummed with that odd quiet that follows low morale. You could hear keyboards like distant rain. I sat at my desk, fingers hovering over keys, heart steady as a drum but focused, breath measured. There's this tiny, meditative moment right before you press send, like coiling a spring, and when I exhaled I let the plan loose. One anonymous email blast, sent in a single, clean motion, went to HR, compliance, and several top executives. It wasn't emotional drivel. It was a dossier, flagged emails, recorded phone clips, spreadsheets cross-checked, signatures, timelines. Every claim documented. No insinuations. No hearsay. Just facts dressed in forensic clarity. It was impossible to wave away. What followed felt cinematic but, mercifully, entirely real. The compliance officer walked into the marketing bullpen with a look that erased any poker face. "Jacob, please come with me," she said, matter of fact. He gathered his bag with those faintly trembling hands and left the room pale and hollow. The office went silent in that way you hear when a window breaks, a single crack and then an unbearable hush. That was the first sound of the dominoes falling. Within days, Melissa's department was under formal review. Anonymous reports that tied mismanagement to missed deadlines and financial irregularities started surfacing. HR opened investigations, auditors quietly asked for more documentation. The junior assistant I'd quietly coached through confidence and a few necessary interviews got a quiet promotion, not to gloat, but to plug a gap where I needed eyes and ears. She fed me details, not gossip, and kept the narrative clean. Meanwhile, the small coalition of overlooked employees began to speak up in meetings where it mattered. Complaints that had once been shrugged away suddenly had weight. The clique found themselves shrinking into corners, exposed and defensive. And me? I stayed in the background. No high fives in the hallway, no victory lap. I sat with the knowledge that throwing the first punch was the easiest part. Making sure they never recovered, that was the marathon. I watched them falter, watched confidence curdle into fear, watched the fragile throne of their influence crack along every seam I'd spent months finding. But even as I watched the house of cards tumble, I felt that familiar, funny little twist in my stomach, not triumph, exactly, not yet. Because bringing them down was one thing. Ensuring they never rebuilt themselves, that required another move, and there was one variable I hadn't fully accounted for. The days after I pulled the first thread felt like living inside a storm that never quite passed. Jacob was escorted out that same morning, his suspension announced with the sort of clinical finality companies hide behind when they want to pretend nothing dramatic happened. He walked through the bullpen pale as paper, hands trembling, like someone had cut the power to his bravado. Where he'd once swaggered and held court, people now crossed the hall with eyes fixed to the floor, as if shame was contagious and they didn't want to catch it. Melissa reacted differently, not with tears, but with a scorched earth fury. She called in favors like a general summoning reserves, threatened lawsuits that smelled of desperation, and tried to lean on anyone who might save her. She even hunted witnesses, tried to intimidate them into silence. But favors have an expiration date, and her debts and divorce didn't care about bravado. At meetings she used to dominate, her voice started to tremble, she missed cues she used to hit without thinking. One night I passed her office and the light was still on at 10:30, the sound of her keyboard clicking like a panic drum. An envelope poked out from under a folder, past due notices peeking like teeth. For the first time I saw the private erosion of a public persona. It was ugly, and somehow, a little horribly satisfying to watch. People started coming to me. Quietly at first, a knock on the supply room door, "Do you have a minute?" in the corridor, a text that said simply, "Can we talk?" Colleagues who had kept their heads down for years began to lean in and tell me things they'd been too afraid to say before, favors traded for promotions, projects reassigned to friends, offhanded humiliations that added up to careers ground into dust. They didn't come for revenge. Most of them wanted fairness. They wanted breathing room. They wanted not to wake up every morning expecting a knife in the back. And they looked at me like a match who'd already been struck. But power fights dirty. Melissa launched a counteroffensive that was personal and clever. Rumors started to swirl, I was sabotaging the company, I was a mole, I was untrustworthy. Anonymous notes, veiled warnings in email threads, passive-aggressive meeting comments meant to isolate me. For a while, it worked. People I thought were allies gave me sidelong looks. The cafeteria conversations cooled when I entered. The isolation stung in bone-deep ways I hadn't anticipated. Late at night, doubt would creep in and sit on my chest, whispering the questions I'd been trying to silence. Had I misread how far they'd go? Was I becoming what I'd set out to stop? Then the tide turned again. Testimonies came forward, one by one, until the pile was more than a suspicion. Recordings, emails, the small dishonest gestures that add up to a pattern, all of it. HR could no longer sweep the complaints under glossy reports. The junior assistant I'd quietly encouraged and coached, the one who'd been terrorized into silence, came forward with contracts and budget sheets that didn't add up. She'd found payments routed in ways that smelled of favoritism, of deals cut in the dark. When we presented that to a few board members, the reaction was immediate. People who still cared about the company's survival wanted answers. I started getting pulled into closed-door conversations, strategy sessions that had names like risk mitigation and leadership restructure. The invisible guy was suddenly in the room where decisions were made. It was intoxicating and exhausting all at once. The stress stacked up in layers, sleepless nights, the strain of people depending on me, the fragile trust one had to keep building. I learned quickly that being right and being believed are two separate wars. But I held on because, whatever else, this had stopped being a personal vendetta. It had become a chance to change the rules for everyone who'd been stepped on. Then new trouble arrived from a place I hadn't fully expected, the infrastructure itself. One evening, while I was combing through another batch of documents, my screen went black. A quick blink and the login prompt returned, but my files had garbled names, messages disappeared mid-scan, and a creeping cold settled in my gut. Someone was in the system. That subtle sabotage, the vanishing emails, the corrupted attachments, wasn't random. It was targeted. I started tracing digital footprints, checking access logs, cross-referencing timestamps against people's shifts. It didn't take long. One of the people I'd always seen as a background figure, a senior member of IT, started to line up with odd access patterns. They were checking files they had no business touching, at odd hours, aligning suspiciously with times when I'd sent sensitive documents. The suspicion was poisonous, a mole, someone selling breadcrumbs back to Melissa's camp. I didn't rush. You don't expose a mole without being certain. I built a digital fortress around my work, encrypted files, layered passwords, secure offsite backups. Then I set a trap. I crafted a document that looked valuable, juicy, even, but embedded it with a traceable marker. Whoever opened it outside the right permissions would reveal themselves in the logs. It felt almost theatrical, and I admit, I relished the craft of it. Late one night, a message popped up, a taunt, short and smug. You're good, but not good enough. The culprit had bitten. I traced access times, correlated them with badge scans and remote logins, and the picture snapped into focus. The senior IT staffer had been siphoning info and passing it along. I didn't confront them in the hallway or corner them with accusations. I compiled every scrap, the original dossier on Jacob and Melissa, the proofs of internal sabotage, the smear campaigns, and asked for a private meeting with the CEO and board. Walking into that room felt like stepping into a high-stakes trial. The air was recycled and cool, my shirt stuck slightly to my back where the adrenaline ran. I laid out the timeline, the logs, the emails, the payments, the recordings, methodically and without flourish. Faces went pale. A few people tried to cast doubt, attempted to salvage reputations out of habit and fear. I was ready. I had anticipated the defenses and brought the counters. By the time I finished, the board was quiet and sharp with decision. Actions happened fast after that. The IT staffer was suspended pending investigation, Melissa was placed on unpaid leave, and Jacob's termination was finalized. And in a twist that still felt surreal, they offered me a place at the table, not as some token, but as someone with a vote in what came next. From the stairwell windows I could see the city rain blur into streaks of neon. I tasted metal and coffee and the odd, electric thrill of vindication. But the offer wasn't a coronation. It was a responsibility that carried its own dangers. The old guard didn't roll over. Their allies lurked in corners, whispering doubts, nudging small sabotage, waiting for a moment to strike back. I couldn't do the rebuilding alone. So I started building properly. I reached out, not with speeches, but with listening. I met with people who had been marginalized, whose ideas had been stolen, who'd been pushed to the edges. I sat in empty conference rooms and heard stories, took notes, validated hurt. I courted the fence-sitters too, the middle managers who had power but feared picking a side. I told them plainly what was at stake. The company could either become a place where results mattered, or it would keep operating by favoritism and fear. Trust had to be earned, not demanded, and I worked for it. We created anonymous channels for reporting, rolled out training on transparency and ethics, and slowly replaced favoritism with metrics and accountability. It was messy. People made mistakes, resentments flared, and yes, there were betrayals. But gradually meetings became about ideas again, not about who got to speak the loudest. Results started to outshine politics. For the first time in years, I felt like we might actually turn this place into something better. And yet, even as I pushed forward with policy drafts and coalition meetings, I felt that nagging itch of unease. Someone still watched us from the shadows. I could feel it in the way certain files lagged, in the occasional strange absence of a person who should have been in the room. The power structure we were chipping away at had roots deeper than Melissa and Jacob, a network that had learned to be invisible. One late evening, after a long session with legal and HR where we hashed out next steps, I walked back to my desk, glanced at my phone, and saw a single new notification. No sender. One line. You did well. But do you really think you've won? I closed the message, hand steady but heart knocking a little faster. Outside, the rain kept its metronome. Inside, the quiet after the storm felt less like peace and more like the breath before the next lightning strike. Just when I thought I'd finally carved out solid ground beneath my feet, the past came knocking, and it didn't knock softly. It was late, the kind of night where the parking lot hums with quiet and the streetlights buzz like tired sentinels. As I approached my car, I saw it, an envelope tucked under the driver's side door, edges damp from the mist. No name. No logo. Just weightless paper that somehow felt heavier than a brick. Inside was a single sheet with 5 words scrawled across it in black ink. You're not as clean as you think. It felt like someone had punched me in the ribs. Not hard. Just enough to knock the air out of me. I stared at that message, heart thudding. Was it a threat? A warning? A promise? I couldn't stop my mind from going places I'd locked away for years. The things I'd done to survive. The lines I'd crossed when nobody was watching. The parts of my story I'd buried so deep I'd almost forgotten them. Someone knew. Someone had found a crack. The days after that were a blur of paranoia wrapped in silence. My phone rang with unknown numbers. I caught shadows near my apartment, silhouettes that vanished before I could get close. My laptop glitched at odd hours. It wasn't about the office anymore. This was personal. The war I'd waged had spilled into my life. And whoever was coming after me, they weren't playing office politics. I tightened everything. My phone, my accounts, my locks. I reached out to old contacts, people I trusted not because they were kind, but because they were loyal. But the deeper I dug, the more tangled everything became. This wasn't just about my enemies anymore. It was about the skeletons in my own closet. The things I'd hoped would never crawl out. And just when the shadows began to close in, an unexpected light flickered through. A single message popped up on an encrypted app one barely used. We need to talk. I can help. The sender's name hit me like a bucket of cold water, Rachel. A former colleague. Someone I'd barely spoken to beyond polite nods in the hallway. She'd always been quiet, the kind of sharp that hides in plain sight. My first thought was, trap. But desperation has a way of bending your caution. We met in a small, nondescript cafe miles away from the office. Rachel looked exactly as I remembered, calm eyes, steady hands, a mind that never stopped calculating. Her voice was low, but there was an urgency beneath it. She'd seen everything unfolding, the sabotage, the corruption, and now the personal threats against me. Then she dropped the bomb. She had information. Not just office gossip or petty secrets, evidence. Evidence that the rot went deeper than marketing. It was tied to senior executives. Offshore accounts. Shadow deals. She wanted out. She wanted change. We struck a deal that night. 2 people who had played the game long enough, now ready to burn the rulebook. It was dangerous. Reckless. But necessary. Rachel had access to things I could never touch, encrypted communications, board-level correspondence, financial records. What we found made everything else look small. Money funneled into offshore accounts. Senior leadership cutting deals with partners they were supposed to be regulating. Lies woven so tight they'd convinced themselves they were untouchable. Night after night, Rachel and I sat in quiet corners, screens glowing between us. Every new discovery was a gut punch. Every piece of proof another layer peeled back from a rotting core. Suddenly, all the cruelty, all the office games made sense. The toxic culture wasn't accidental. It was a shield. A distraction. A way to protect something far uglier underneath. We built our own fortress of evidence. Dozens of files, recordings, messages, contracts, everything backed up, encrypted, and sent to people we trusted outside the company. We didn't just want to take them down. We wanted the truth to detonate in the light where no one could smother it again. The night before we pulled the trigger, I barely slept. Every shadow felt like a set of eyes. Every creak in the floorboards made me tighten my grip on the chair. But we were ready. In the morning, we sent it all. HR, legal, journalists, investigators. A storm set loose with a single click. The fallout was immediate. Headlines hit before lunch. Executives scrambled to resign before being forced out. Investigations erupted. The carefully constructed empire of arrogance and rot began to splinter before everyone's eyes. Melissa vanished, some said she left the state. Jacob's name was ruined. Senior execs lawyered up. And the office buzzed like a beehive struck with a stick, fear, shock, and for some, quiet relief. Colleagues who'd once whispered behind their hands started thanking me quietly in hallways. Others couldn't even look at me. Power makes people pick sides. But I wasn't celebrating. I felt hollow, exhausted, like someone had wrung the last drop of fight out of me. Revenge, I realized, isn't clean. It eats at you. It remakes you. It had made me into someone I barely recognized. Months passed. The empire that had once ruled over us had crumbled into ash. The toxic clique was gone or in ruins. But I wasn't the same invisible guy I'd been on that Monday morning so long ago. I had a voice now. A seat at the table. Real power to change things. Rachel and I built something new with those who had suffered in silence. We set up anonymous reporting channels. We pushed for transparency. We forced accountability into the bloodstream of the company. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't perfect. There were still snakes in the grass. But slowly, the air changed. Meetings became about strategy, not survival. Promotions became about work, not favors. Some nights, I still wondered if I'd gone too far. If the man who had quietly walked into that meeting room months ago would even recognize himself now. But then I'd think about the laughter in that boardroom when they stole my work. About the envelope under my car door. About every quiet voice that had been drowned out by power. And I'd know. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was a reckoning. And I wasn't going to stop. Thanks for listening to this story. If you found it gripping, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. What would you have done in my shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Stay sharp, stay safe, and remember, sometimes, the quietest storm hits the hardest.